All right, welcome everybody around the world. Welcome to all my subscribers. Hopefully, I won't get interrupted and I'll be able to end this video. So, I'm going to try not to make it long, try to aim for shorter. But what I want to do for today is for believers to hear a simple message telling you, based on the information, based on the evidence, what we will likely see occur at some point in the next year, in the next 1 year. And I'm not styling this video in a way where I have to provide evidence for this and that there. I've made lots of videos that do that on this topic already. So I might reference something here or there, but for this video, I'm doing it for an audience of believers. Okay, so that's my orientation in presenting this. So for us believers who know and believe that the end of days is coming soon, how can this and why does this disclosure, UFO ET disclosure, why is that happening now? And what does that have to do in relation with the end days? What can we expect to see? Because uh, UFOlogy is possibly expecting one thing to be coming, which might seem more dark and foreboding. Whereas for the biblical believers, something, yes, dark is coming, but also great light, you could say at the same time. And at the end of the day, the goodness will prevail. That's the essence, right? So we have two contrasting things. One is dark and gloomy, that is coming, and one is, yes, there will be dark and gloom, but the light will come, the light will prevail, and then it will be blessed for those who have deserved it. So, two different scenarios. What is coming, what is happening, and why is disclosure happening now? That's the purpose of this video. So, none of these opinions of mine are wild opinions. They're all based on reasoning, which I think anybody else would agree with. Have if you give the time to listen. So, and I'm not going to bore everybody with providing evidence for this and that. Like I said, this is for believers, right? You just want a nice, simple message. Why is this happening now? What are we going to see? Well, I believe evidently the reason why disclosure is happening now is because something is coming soon. And there's reason and evidence for that, like I've detailed in many other videos. But what is this something that's coming soon? One thing I tried to warn with some of my recent videos was the dark narrative, which could be what is going to be relayed to the public. Now, that seems like the most far fetched scenario that, a dark, scary narrative would be relayed to the public, because one would think, oh, that would make the public, paranoid and afraid. It would be more likely to induce public chaos. The average person can understand that, the secrecy in UFOlogy has been kept for 80 years. One good reason would be because the public might, the perception is the public might, lose their minds, so to speak, or disrupt economies and ruin everything. So for them to, for the government and all that to relay what is a dark narrative to the public, you would like to think it's the most far fetched scenario. But and I don't know what they will unveil, what they will relay, but we have, based on some evidence, and also even without that evidence, and weighing it as 50-50, uh, you know, because the other evidence isn't that rock solid. But based on some evidence, there is reason to believe that the dark narrative might actually be what is relayed eventually through the differing stages of the coming disclosure. But even if there wasn't that somewhat fair evidence for that, even in absence of that reality, we have to consider what if the dark narrative is relayed to us, or a dark narrative. So, go watch those videos if you haven't already, where I detail the dark narrative and all of that and get into it in more detail. But for this video here, we have to consider that that may be relayed. So I'm not here to tell you what you will hear. I don't know. We have to wait and see. But there is a possibility it could be the dark narrative. And we have to consider that as well. Again, this video is to detail what we're going to be seeing. Why is disclosure happening now, like I said, and what will we see be happening in the next 1 year? This is a message for believers. Um, so we're going to see, because we've been told we're going to get it, we're going to see more stages of disclosure, right? Um, it's been suggested that, they will increase the severity or the significance of them in the later coming batches. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But it would make sense if they're releasing it in stages. Even if it's a lot of material, I mean, why not release it all at one time? You know what I mean? But anyways, we are going to be getting more stages of disclosure. We're going to get a narrative at some point, whether it's a dark narrative or not. We have to wait and see. So we're going to see that happen. That's probably going to happen in the next few months. Now, biblically, we know that, and as I've been teaching for years, and in my books that are available on Amazon, for us believers, the end of days is approaching soon, based on all the prophecies, the maths from the prophecies, the historic events around the world that have confirmed these things, and all the fulfillment of the various prophecies. Like I said before, and I have other videos that talk about all this in greater detail. There's about 25 biblical prophecies. When you're looking at human history on the timeline from about 0 BC or whatever until now, when Jesus was on the earth, in the tens and twenties common era AD, these things were being said, and they were recorded by 50 AD at the latest. So at that time period, Jesus was saying certain things, and other people said certain things. Certain prophecies were made, and also from the Old Testament, from the Tanakh, other prophecies were made to pertain to that time period. From the change from BC to AD onwards. Just roughly picking that number. Not zero has any significance. I'm just that big chunk. Now, 25 prophecies were made pertaining to that timeline, and all of them have come true. Like I said, any one of the prophecies could have failed to come true historically. The historical events wouldn't have occurred, fulfilling it, and then we'd have a failed prophecy. But we have 25 that pertain to events that would happen even in an order in relation to one another, and they've all come true. That within itself is, not overwhelming evidence. One could argue that the end is definitely coming. Jesus is returning soon, but that within itself is a fair degree of evidence. 25 different prophecies to all come true, not just one, not just a few, but 25, and it didn't falter or fail anywhere along the line. But in those 25, we have some mega important prophecies, like the ones I cover in my End Days book. These core 7 prophecies, and arguably one or two of them are the most important. They provide so much number, mathematics, even algebra at times that's required, and the historical events and what will happen is all detailed in these. These are some of the biggest and most important prophecies. But all these together, they point to 2027, because this is hinging on the Dome of the Rock construction, how that plays into the prophecy of Daniel. And I have videos where I go through all that in detail. But 2027, like I said, this video is for the believers. So the Bible prophecies have not only come true, even massive, important prophecies that are very complex with many different aspects. It's not a prophecy where it's like, oh, one thing is going to happen and it happened. No, that one prophecy in the list of 25, that one alone has so many elements within itself, where any one of the elements could have failed to be fulfilled and thrown off that whole prophecy as being a failure. But that one prophecy of Daniel alone contains so many elements, and all of them were fulfilled historically, right? And it's a tremendously important prophecy. Provides one of the, it's one of the core pillars that pinpoint the final year, which would be 2027, according to the maths. So, according to a biblical perspective, we've known that the end of days is soon approaching, right? Not everybody is clued into the prophecy of Daniel with the true identity of the final beast kingdom being the Islamic Empire. A lot of people have not recognized that, but there have been historians and scholars, biblical, who have considered that and recognized that, but just not a lot. And I think this is because Satan has blinded the people. But nonetheless, what we've been presented in Earth's history aligns with the Bible prophecy, all of those things, even with that empire as being the final beast kingdom. So all of these things have been fulfilled. That is a striking, powerful statement. And one thing I will say again, and I have a video especially just for this topic, so you could hear in more detail. But using AI to calculate and to show the formulas, the complex formulas that it would use, I asked it to estimate, because it can't be exact, the mathematical probability, the odds of the prophecy of Ezekiel, which pertains to the timing of the end days, right? I asked it to calculate the odds that that prophecy could have just been a bogus prophecy, like it's not from God, it's not going to happen, but those things coincidentally still happened in history. It's bogus, but it just happened to come true without any divine type intervention or presence, right? I asked it to calculate the odds for that. So, how likely is it that it was fake and just happened to come true, in essence, right? And it calculated, because I gave it the criteria to consider, right? Because in that prophecy of Ezekiel, even though in that prophecy, unlike Daniel and others, there's no spans of time with numbers specified, like 1,000 years or anything like that, like nothing that is stated. But it states that certain nations would exist at one time, and it also states certain things that these nations would do to one another. Now, in the last 2,000 years, right, Israel fell in around 66 to 70 AD, and it laid, dormant, like the nation had fallen for about near 2,000 years by now, right? And one sec, I'll keep going, but if somebody comes home, I'll have to make the video again another time. Um, but over the last 2,000 years, Israel never, existed again. And a lot of historians even say that. Let me just check to see if somebody's here. Here. Sorry. Yeah, over the last 2,000 years, Israel didn't exist as a nation. And a lot of historians famously said that the odds of it coming back into existence would be like next to nothing, like be impossible odds. Like it would just never happen. Because Israel was so utterly smitten, the temple destroyed, the people, like fled or were punished or oppressed in various different ways, possibly even enslaved to each their own or wiped out. It was such a scattering. Very few remained in Israel, if I'm not mistaken, or next to none. But the point is that it lay dormant like that, even extinct, you could say, for so long, like 2,000 years. And the fact that it was reborn in 1948 is an incredibly powerful thing. Now, looking at the mathematical odds, I made the AI consider the various variables, such as, the nation Israel is said in the prophecy that it would be reborn, it would exist again, and the people would be returning there to live. Right? That's one condition. Now, over the last 2,000 years, that never happened. Israel fell and it laid fallen for 2,000 years. So, for one of the conditions in that prophecy is Israel has to be reborn. Like if historically Israel was never reborn, then one could argue that's a failed prophecy. It hasn't come true yet, right? Israel had to be reborn just as one of the elements of that prophecy, right? One of the conditions, right? And it did, right? So the AI calculated the probability, the odds for Israel being reborn, just by chance, not because the divine prophecy said that it divinely would occur, right? Um, but also, there are other elements of the prophecy of Ezekiel, right? The other nations that would oppose Israel after it was reborn, and such, right? And just on that prophecy of Ezekiel, which is a more of a minor prophecy, it's talking about big important things, but it doesn't provide any numbers or anything like that, right? Not like the other more detailed prophecies from Daniel. But even though it's more of a minor prophecy in that sense, right? There's less meat to it. There's less, the prophecy of Daniel is so much more complex with so many other elements that all came true in history. The prophecy of Ezekiel only has like a small handful of different elements, right? But the AI calculated the odds of all those different elements coming true in history, right? If the prophecy was just bunk, right? And the odds are that for this, for those events that Ezekiel said would occur, which have historically occurred, for them to occur by chance and not because it was appointed to happen or it was going to happen and foretold by God, but just by chance, the odds would be 1 in about 49 billion. right? Which means that if you had one chance every day for something to occur like this, you would have to live out the entire, up till now lifespan of the universe multiple times with one chance every day for this to occur. That's how impossible the odds are just for the prophecy of Ezekiel to come true if it wasn't a real prophecy. And what that shows you is that obviously and logically, the prophecy of Ezekiel must be real prophecy. And even the AI had to agree and say that, yes, it's high, I can't remember the exact words to quote the AI, but it concluded that based, because I quizzed it on this, I said, based on the fact that, the odds are so impossible, is it fair to say that, you know, even using intelligent analysis, that one would have to logically conclude that this was a real prophecy because it came true with impossible odds. And the AI even agreed. So, in just using that as one example, and I have a video where I go into that one in greater length, right? But just that one prophecy alone, let me let the cat out before he keeps me out. Come on. But anyways, just that one prophecy alone with those type of odds, and the reason I'm mentioning it is because you can't fathom how impossible the odds would be if you were to consider like the prophecy of Daniel, with its many, even dozens, like one or two, maybe even 3 dozen different elements or variables, conditions that it would have, which again have all come true historically, right? And numbers, like specifically long time periods, all of these things factored in, the odds of that occurring coming true by chance are impossible, like literally impossible. Okay, literally impossible. And I even have a search, and I believe I have a video up on it where I go through it in greater detail. I believe I did a more recent video where I quizzed the AI with the Ezekiel odds and some of the Daniel odds just on one or a few elements, because it would be too complex to form a question with the whole of the prophecy of Daniel, because there's like dozens of elements, right? Um, but it concluded that it would be impossible. I remember the word infinitesimal, in terms of how likely it would be, like next to zero. It's almost impossible for this to occur. Like it's basically essentially impossible for these things to come true if by chance, right? So if you were to put the whole of all of the prophecies and the whole of the prophecies of Daniel in there, and for it to compute that, it would certainly say impossible, because it's already concluded that these things are virtually impossible to occur by chance. And like I said, if you want to argue, well, that means it's still possible it could happen. Well, yeah. Well, if you had one chance every day of calendar year for it to occur, you'd have to wait out lifetimes of the universe for it to eventually happen. That's the odds, right? So we all have to logically agree that, if unbiased artificial intelligence, which is arguably higher intelligence than ours, can calculate and at the speed of light, that these are impossible odds. We have to, as human beings, accept that this is evidence that the Bible prophecies are true. Because even if a skeptic, an atheist, wanted to argue, oh no, it could just happen by chance. Well, here we quizzed an unbiased intelligence that's greater than ours, you or I's, and at the speed of light, it calculated and showed the formulas, and how, even though they're estimated odds, it showed and described how each of these elements and conditions, would be very difficult to attain by chance, right? And when factored together and considered together, all these elements show that it's impossible that all of this occurs by chance, right? And these are just some of the prophecies out of the 25, right? But when you put all that into a basket, the logic alone tells you that it must be true, and it's been proven. It's been proven, therefore, even to skeptics and atheists, that if you want to be a sound mind human being that thinks logically and accepts fact, right, that you would have to accept that these are real prophecies. They came true, and it's impossible for them to have come true by chance. You would have to logically accept that that is your scientific evidence and reason to believe in them. Okay, because a lot of people question the Bible, right? So that's an important thing to say. The evidence is there to show that this is legit. And the world events that have been historically fulfilled and the ones that are happening now that were detailed by Ezekiel, all of this together shows that it's not just something that happened in the past. The fact that the current world events are, word for word matching up with Ezekiel, and those are part of those calculated odds of 1 in like 50 billion, right? That those things would happen by chance because those different nations would have to exist after the 2,000 years and so forth and do certain things and have certain alliances. And the fact that that did happen shows that this is a current thing that's being fulfilled. That's the final domino, because in Ezekiel's prophecy, in that prophecy, when those armies of what are called Gog and Magog, when they go to it, which is an alliance of nations, including Iran, when they go to attack Israel, that's triggering the last domino, because they attack Israel and then they attack Jerusalem at some point. And when they attack Jerusalem, it says that's when, the forces of God arrive. Okay, when you connect that over to what the other Tanakh prophets said, and because in the list of 25, right, you have various different prophets. There's Daniel is major, but there's lots of different prophets, right? And when you put them together from the different books of the Bible, right, written by different people at different times, which is something else that the AI had to factor in mathematically as well, because that adds another degree of impossibility. These people were different people at different times, even in different places, writing these books. You would have to have a conspiracy that they were conspiring together, even hundreds of years apart, right? Even writing or reading in different languages at the time, but they would have had to conspire together across time to fool people in the future if this was bogus, right? But even still, it's impossible that these prophecies came true by chance, right? So the logic shows you that these were not people with some conspiracy, the different prophets who lived at different times having conspiracy to work together to fool people with bogus prophecies, right? You see what I mean? No, they were real prophets. They weren't bogus prophets. That's the point. When you look at what the other bona fide prophets said, like Zechariah, for example, talks about things that are the exact same event that Ezekiel is speaking about. So that's the final domino. And they already did start to attack Israel a few years ago. Now, for this to be happening, the very last thing to occur is when they attack Jerusalem, and that provokes the arrival of the forces of God. So that's literally when God arrives in whatever way that he does, or the forces of God, when Jesus, the Messiah, returns, when all that occurs, as we know as Christians, it's going to be very sudden, it says, even like lightning, right? We're going to see the sign of the Son of Man in the heavens, which will look like some type of spectacle coming, and then it's going to be here so quick and go across the world so quickly, right? We all know this as Christians, even no matter what denomination you're from, most understand that, right? So it's very important to understand that, according to these prophecies, that's going to be either this year or next year by 2027. This is hinging on the Dome of the Rock and its construction dates, right? Which is one of the elements of the prophecy of Daniel that's been fulfilled. And it's a key element. It's a key hinge because, as I've taught for so long, Daniel's prophecies in the books of Daniel, they span a period of like 2,600 years. It's absolutely incredible. That is the longest period of time for any biblical prophecy to detail things. Like, he details a span of 2,600 years. And in that span of 2,600 years, there's different, sub brackets where, okay, this is a period of 1,335 years, or this is a period of 490 years, right? But he details an overall period of time of 2,600 years, 24, 25, 2,600, around that. The longest such period ever in the Bible, with the most criteria, conditions, elements, whatever you want to call it, in that prophecy. But yet they've all come true, right? So it would be foolish at this point here to ignore that evidence. So that's the scriptural side of things. So that's as far as I'll go into that. So we have the scripture has been pointing us to 2027. It's going to happen then. What are we going to see, right? And this is why I think disclosure has happened now. If you look at disclosure talk, even it's kind of distasteful to me. Like, it throws me off. It perturbs me that they're trying to make everything sound so spiritual now, like angels and demons and all this, even in UFOlogy. The average enthusiast or believer in UFOlogy is, typically not religious. And, they always view religious, you know, outlook as like something faulty. Like you shouldn't be religious. I know a lot of atheists and I know how they think, right? So that's been like the vast majority of believers in UFOlogy aren't, like Christian people. The average Christian person is out there demonizing aliens as demons and all of that. And they think that heaven is a place for spiritual angels and that we become spiritual angels afterwards, right? That's the average. And again, just the average Christian understanding. The average understanding in UFOlogy is that church people are crazy for thinking that there, right? So we have such a difference of opinion. And that's why, I want to make this video to make it clear what will happen, what we are to understand and what we should expect. And not just based on my wild opinion, like I said, but by thorough analysis over decades. And, the evidence speaks for itself. So, like I said many times before, the Bible timing lines up with the 20 sources that I've got videos on, the list of 20 sources that for the last 40 years have spoken of the years 2025, 2026, or 2027 as being a year when there's going to be some really big thing happening, like arrival of aliens, a cosmic battle, a huge cataclysm on the earth. All these elements basically tied together. Each of the 20 sources, describes a various different thing, but they're all essentially what they're doing is there is a big event that's going to take place. And these sources, off the top of my head, I don't think any of them are even religious, right? Um, and they're just giving their information from their sources, right, or from their experience or their knowledge, right? Each of their testimonies, right, over the last 40 years. But so these people weren't conspiring together to come up and agree with, the 25, 26, 27 timeline. I mean, they weren't conspiring together, right? Some of these sources are military or, intelligence or whatever. One of them is Mari Rivera, a UFO abductee from the late 80s. There's various different degrees of sources, but out of those 20, they all speak about the same period of time. I think it's uncanny evidence that, that time frame aligns with the Bible time frame. So what they all say is coming is an arrival of, like extraterrestrials, right? The argument is whether good ones or bad ones or both or what, right? There's also talk that, there's going to be cataclysms on the earth, probably caused by space rocks that hit. But again, these things, as I've pointed out before, align with what the Bible says will occur. So when you start to ask, why is disclosure happening now? Well, if these things are going to occur by 2027, the Bible warned us. The prophecies, like I was going through earlier, they're verified, bona fide. They got to be real. It's impossible that they're bogus prophecies. We have reason to believe that these things will be happening this year or next year. We have reason to believe that based on the odds, the impossible odds of those prophecies, right? And the fact that those numbers align with these other 20 sources who aren't even giving a religious glance, right? 20 even totally disconnected sources over a span of 40 years have all spoken about that same span of time, right? As being when what occurs? Oh, the arrival of fleets of aliens, good or bad, in a battle, in space rocks. That's exactly what the Bible says is going to occur. And that leads me into what are we going to see happen? Well, like I say, we're going to see more batches of disclosure. We're going to see a narrative relayed, whether it's a light version or a dark version. We don't know. We have to wait and see what the narrative is, right? But irregardless of what narrative we are told with the disclosure at the end, is that the reason it's evident that the reason they're giving this disclosure now, in defiance of the 80 years of strict secrecy, is because they know something's coming that is outside of their control. And in order for them to retain any type of control, and I believe they should do this in order to retain control, is that they would have to warn people in advance, right? But keep it secret up to the last moment to maintain public order, right? So I understand the reasoning. right? So if I understand the reasoning for the secrecy, right, then they have to have a reason for now disclosing. And the only sensible reason for why they would keep such secrecy to maintain public order, but now be forced to disclose, I think it's because they know something's coming that's outside of their control. So they're going to disclose. The logical thing to do would be keep it secret until the last minute. And then last minute being where you are now, you should wisely start telling people things, right? They don't want to give people 24 hours to know and understand the full raw truth, whatever it is, that as much as they know. They want to give people more time. It could be weeks or months, right? Maybe even up to a year. Who knows? But they're going to wait until the last convenient minute and then make the intelligent decision to start telling people. And they're going to tell people in stages. They're not going to break the floodgates off the bat, right? And I think that's what we're seeing now. And I think probably rapidly over the next weeks and months, we're going to see more unveiled. And leading up to maybe a fuller disclosure of whatever light or dark narrative they're going to end up presenting. But we're going to see more of that as the year progresses, right? And then when it's reached that last span of time, because we don't know the day or hour that the arrival is going to happen, like the Bible says. Um, but if based on a recent video that I did, if we looked back at the dates for all these major historical events and those biblical end days prophecies, each of these key core events, some of the most pivotal elements in the prophecies, like the construction of the Dome of the Rock, the death of the Messiah, big core events, they all occurred in the same time of year, right? Which gives one reason to believe that, okay, well, if you're looking at the 2,600-year long time period that Daniel detailed with the subsections in between, like this is a chunk of 490 years, this is a chunk of whatever 1335 years. We now have a time of the year, so it's not a day or hour, it's not a week, it's not a precise month, because the Hebrew months don't align with Gregorian months. But the time of Nisan, okay, is when Jesus died. He died during the time of Nisan. I think it's March, April, maybe April, May, something like that, right? But the time of Nisan. So it's fair to say, long story short, that because each of those key events occurred during the time of Nisan, the month of Nisan, that if you're taking precise measures of time, then that gives you a more defined starting point, right? Which means you would have a more defined endpoint, which means that it may happen by Nisan of 2027. You may not have to wait till December. It might be happening in March or April of 2027, right? Now, whether it does, whether it doesn't, that's not important. But we're in this last 1 year chunk basically now, right? And like I said, the only thing left biblically to occur, according to the prophecies, is the very next thing would be if these armies, Gog Magog, attack Jerusalem. And that could happen any day, right? And they've launched some rockets at Jerusalem and this and that. But if that was to occur, that would be the next very thing. And so when we hear that in the news, just be prepared. And what are we going to see occur? Well, we're going to see uh, what the 20 sources, each has their own piece of testimony, but altogether, the 20 sources over the 40 years detail that there's going to be an arrival, like I said, of some cataclysm, which is always usually going to be like a space rock. It's going to be a cataclysm for the Earth. And arrival of extraterrestrials, right? And a big change in the world. Like everything's going to change for humanity, right? Like something big is going to happen, right? If that's what UFOlogy has been saying and confirming, and the Bible says the same thing, right? So what the Bible says is that when that end day arrives, so let's just say they've attacked Jerusalem, and then that triggers the arrival of the forces, right? And they've probably been making their way here anyways, right? Because they're probably watching and they know the timing of things. But nonetheless, what we will see happen is, because you may not see the news or hear that they attacked Jerusalem, right? So what is the average person going to see? What is the believer and even the non-believer going to see? But as believers, I can say what you're going to see is the arrival of heavenly cosmic fleet. I don't know how big, but probably spanning the entire horizon, just a cosmic fleet of all the good beings out there throughout the universe, throughout the heavens, that God has called together, and all being led by Jesus, right? And they're going to arrive to the earth very, very quickly. Okay, and when they arrive, they're going to go and end that battle that's taking place over Jerusalem and Israel, but also the entire world, because it says that Jesus will command his angels, the heavenly messengers, the cosmic ones, to go out, cosmic beings, to go out across the world and to gather those who are being judged as worthy, right? So when Jesus has arrived, the judgment is beginning. When he arrives, whether we hear a trumpet or not, there's going to be a trumpet sounding, and the resurrection will occur. And it also even says that the inhabitants of Hades will come up to be judged, right? So this is going to be a very crazy time, like hell on earth, right? And because essentially the Bible also says space rocks will be hitting us. And when you look at the trumpets, seals, and vials, and I go through that in my books as well, they overlap and align with one another on many of the trumpet, seals, and vials. They're all describing the same main events, but they start off with space rocks hitting the Earth, right? The great hail, right? Stars falling. This occurs first. And that lines up with what the 20 sources from ufology say, and also some confirm is going to happen, okay? And that's what the Bible says is going to happen. So we're going to see that heavenly army arrive, right? And the bad guys, Satan and his messengers, are going to go out, as it says, to fight against the Messiah and his army. So what we're going to see at that time is a great arrival of good beings coming from the heavens, from outer space. We're also going to see an arrival of bad beings, but they would have just come from their bases on the earth or the moon or whatever, right? But we're going to see an arrival of the forces of good and evil, and there's going to be a celestial cosmic battle overhead over the earth. This is what we're going to see. So, of course, this is going to trigger, and space rocks hitting the earth as well. Eventually, there's going to be a big one and all of that, right? But space rocks hitting the earth. So there's going to be, as you could imagine, a lot of public, it'll be chaos, right? That's a doomsday scenario, right? So any wise government, knowing that this would occur, and they probably do, would have backup plans ready, right? Now, if you watch my dreams playlist, I go into, my end days dream that I've had since I was a child, and how there are underground cities that people are taken to for safekeeping when all this stuff goes down, right? And that's been confirmed in ufology, that there are underground cities and bases and so forth, like the ones I've experienced in my dream, and the dream feels so real, right? So what I think is going to happen is that when all this stuff goes down, there's space rocks hitting the earth, and when this cosmic battle is occurring, and there's this great arrival of both good and bad beings, you're going to have such an amount of chaos just occurring on the planet. That's just going to be monumental. And that's something that everybody's going to have to prepare for. The earth is also going to go into darkness at some point as well. But the biggest, most important things are the arrival of the armies of good. Um, a minor point is that the bad guys will also show face, and then they'll fight each other, right? But we know that the good side will win, right? We've been told that in the prophecies. So they will defeat the armies of the wicked. But the important thing is that at this time on the earth, all of humanity, and even the creatures, even to their own degree as necessary, to the inhabitants of the Hades, and to all those who are being resurrected, everybody is going to be judged, right? This is the time of judgment. It's not just a time for rocks to hit the earth. It's not a time just for war. It's the judgment day, because this is going to be a cataclysmic time for the earth. And God has obviously, logically utilized that time as a chance to, hey, let's do the judgment now. I mean, why not? If you think about it, if that stuff is going to happen to the earth, and maybe most of humanity would be lost or whatever, it would be a good time to do a judgment, right? To save all the people who deserve being saved. And you could rescue them from the earth and take them to a new earth, right? So that's what we're going to see happen. We're going to see, because you may not hear about or know about the attack on Jerusalem, right? But the major key things that we're going to visibly see, even around the world, are the arrival of these heavenly fleets, right? Stars descending or falling to the earth, right? We're going to see a battle, the army of the dragon and the beast or whatever fighting against, the Messiah and his army. We're going to see all that occurring, and it's all going to happen very quickly in a short time frame, right? Like it says, and like lightning, this judgment will be taking place because the angels are. Jesus arrives like lightning, goes across the world like lightning, and it says that when he arrives, the trumpet sounds, the dead will resurrect. So all of these key events are happening very quickly, right? Rapidly. It's not like they're going to take days or weeks. It's a very rapid thing. Okay, so when he arrives and all of this is occurring very, very quickly, it's going to be a major shock to everybody. Okay, and at some point, like I said, the earth is going to go into darkness for a period of time. There's going to be a lot of frightening things happening on the earth as well, but the judgment aspect is one of the most important things, because when he arrives, he sends out his angels to go out to the four corners of the world, that's all around the world, and tells them to go and gather. Some of them are in charge of the sealing, right? You have the black horseman who has scales in his hand, right? And elsewhere in Revelation, it talks about, the bad ones won't be able to harm those who are going to be found as worthy until everybody's been sealed. So, because so many things are happening rapidly in a short period of time, that edict had to go out saying to the bad forces, look, you can't touch them until we finish sealing everybody. Okay. And then, basically you can do what you're going to do with the ones who didn't get redeemed, who weren't worthy. So that's why this time of judgment is a critical aspect, right? This is not just an arrival of aliens. It's not just, a war. It's not just this or that. It's a critical time for human beings, right? As living things, because everything on this earth is going to be judged, right? And those who have been found worthy, okay, you're good people, you're righteous and whatever, those who are worthy will be rescued. That's the important thing. Even if you're one of the billions who would have just died and just therefore resurrected, okay, the good and the bad are resurrected. But all of this is occurring during that judgment time, and it'll be very, very quick, according to what is said. Okay, so from our perspective, we may not see anything occur till the last second. Anyways, I gotta go, so take care.